In our series, The World After Coronavirus, today we have with us Professor Atif Mian. Atif is a professor of economics at Princeton, and we're going to ask him what he thinks the world after COVID might look like for debt.
Prior to this global crisis, there was already a big structural problem. Over $70 trillion of debt has accumulated globally. Over the long run, from the 80s onward, global debt to GDP has almost doubled, which is an incredible change. The way growth has happened globally has been very unequal and unbalanced. And it's a consequence of that unbalanced growth that the only way the economy can sustain itself is through creating more and more debt. If you look at the responses to this crisis, it is often going to lead to an incredible increase in the levels of debt that households, governments, and corporations are going to have. It's very hard at that point in time to run macro policy the usual way. So, for example, if you think of interest rates are already at zero. And you would hope that at some point they return to sort of their normal levels, but that's close to impossible. So what that means is that the only way at that point to get out of this situation is to have some sort of massive restructuring of the financial system of the economy.
If I am an individual in Europe, in the US, elsewhere in the world, and I have personal debt, what does this mean for me in a post-COVID world?
What it means is that, especially if you get hit with an income shock, like you get laid off or your income is considerably lower than what you were expecting or what it was before, you will be forced to make adjustments. Households, and not just households, but actually local governments and so on, around the world will be forced to make these kind of adjustments. And those adjustments will be contractionary for the overall economy. That's the bigger worry. And because this problem is going to be pervasive, that's why I'm saying that we are collectively going to be faced with this question of we have to restructure the level of debt that we have. Some of it will have to be written down, some of it will have to be restructured into debt of different maturities and so on. So it's going to be a complicated problem.
We come out of COVID, we will be in a bad shape to begin with. And then you are telling us there will be this further contractionary pressure.
That's right.
Does this mean we are downward spiral going downward further?
Well, the spiral, whether it happens or not, depends on the policy response. If we do not restructure the debt, then there is a real danger of this downward spiral or downward contractionary force being pressured by lower income on one hand or higher uncertainty on one end and the high level of debt that they have on the other. When they are facing these kind of squeezes, before this crisis, the typical response of policymakers effectively have been to somehow try to give them even cheaper credit. That cycle is going to be almost impossible to pursue this time round. And the reason is that interest rates are already at as low as they practically can be. In a way, we have been kicking this can down the road by ramping up more and more on credit creation and letting people kind of binge on credit, if you like, either them borrowing themselves or governments borrowing on their behalf effectively. But the other serious problem that has to be dealt with as well, in the past 30, 40 years, the global economy has gone on a trend which has been highly unequal, with a few benefiting a lot more than the rest. And that process is fundamentally unsustainable at a global macro level. These are two sides of the same coin. The creation of credit is the other side of the process that is generating this unequal growth. And so we will have to address both of these core issues coming out of this crisis. This is what I see as kind of the central theme going forward.
If you think about highly indebted developing countries, what does this mean for them, and what sort of responses are available or advisable either for developing countries or for multilateral finance institutions? What can be done about the situation we will be facing?
There are going to be a number of countries that would end up borrowing or having borrowed a lot in dollar terms, basically from the international community. The way you typically pay that back is through exports, because you have to generate extra revenue in dollars that you then use to pay back this debt. This is going to become particularly hard in the post-COVID world. And one main reason for that is that this crisis is global in nature. Unlike many of the other situations recently where, for example, IMF steps in and kind of tries to roll over existing debts, I feel you're going to find many countries where that is no longer even possible or definitely advisable. And I think it would help if the global economy comes together more in the spirit of Marshall Plan, if you like. And there are more avenues of risk sharing where the richer countries lessen some of the burden of the poorer countries to make sure that we all collectively grow out of this at a more sustainable pace.